I think my belief is that I first encountered Daraka when he was in high school and came to some of my SOS classes with a couple of other buddies. They were activists, and I guess a couple of times coming to this college SOS class about social movements was edifying. And from that point on, we've had connection. He has had a fantastically interesting evolution personally and politically that I've been proud to be a part of. He was, at one point, Youth Secretary of the Democratic Socialists of America. It was a somewhat smaller, to say the least, organization, but it was an important moment for him. He's been active in Scandinavia, in the Social Democratic Party organizing efforts there. He came back to Santa Barbara to study in our SOS department, get his PhD, so it's Dr. Larimore Hall, if you please, and I'm very pleased to have been on that committee. And at the same time, he rose to be the chair of the Santa Barbara County Democratic Party, and from there became vice chair of the state Democratic Party for a period of time. A couple of years ago, I thought there are things that need to be discussed, and I don't want to write a book about them because no one will read that, but people seem to be listening to podcasts. And I thought if Daraka would agree to partner on a podcast with me, that would make it all possible and make it interesting. And so that's what we did. It's called Talking Strategy, Making History, and I think we finished 2 seasons, something like 27 episodes, and every single one of them is a gem. You've got to listen to it. You can find it on Amazon and other places like that if you're a podcaster, and even if you're not a podcaster. But anyway, so the Daraka is now a father. Ada was born just about a month ago, right? I'm hoping that she would be here, but they don't want to take that risk. So I want to introduce to you Dr. Daraka Larimore.
Thank you, Dave. I wrote like a kind of essay to go into a sort of like, mini academic lecture, but didn't realize that you had 2 questions. It was both what I'm concerned about and what gives me hope. I spent most of it writing about the things that concern me, so I've had to rejigger this, but this is a lot like our podcast. Also, I just really want to thank all of the speakers who went before. I think everyone's right. Like, everyone said things that are really important for us to be thinking about, and reflected on what is just an amazing legacy of yours, of Nikki's, of so many veteran activists in this room, of some pretty unique institutions and coalitions that have been built in this community that don't exist everywhere in this state and certainly not everywhere in this country. And if there is a place where some of these difficult contradictions can be worked out and put into good policy and make people's lives better and get people a decent place to live and decent food and decent water, it'll be here in Santa Barbara County. So thank you to everyone here who's done that work. Well, look, in a nutshell, what makes me concerned, what gives me fear and the opposite of hope? Well, it's that we can lose. I mean, everyone gave good reasons or mistakes we could make to lead to that defeat and the success of our opponents, our enemies. And I'm just going to speak plainly. I hope I'm among friends. But they're all right. There's lots of ways we could fuck this up and we could lose. And the stakes are the habitability of the planet, let alone a biodiversity that's worthy of the ecological heritage of Earth. What's at stake is the bodily autonomy of women, of anyone who is genderqueer, who resists a binary. What is at stake is certainly anything approaching a decent middle class in the American sense lifestyle for anyone entering the workforce now, the stakes couldn't be higher. I mean, Dick wrote or talked about the fact that I work in Sweden, and you know, the thing that attracted me to studying and working in Scandinavia as a young, you know, American was, hey, I want to go and work where my politics are mainstream and where we've won a bunch of stuff, and it's just like cool, and we can fight for even cooler stuff because like everything's fine. Sweden has the most right-wing government right now in the history of its democracy. The second largest party in the Swedish parliament was founded by Nazis. I'm not being rhetorical, I'm not exaggerating, I'm not calling someone names. These were Nazis, and they started a party where they realized that instead of shaved heads, they should wear ties, and now they are the dominant force in Swedish politics. Everything reacts to them. That's the reality. They could win. They could win, and they could roll back things that we have taken for granted for decades, many of us our whole lives. For the oldest people here, their adult lives, things wiped away, the very, very basic right to organize. They could win like they did in the referendum here in California on gig work, and just strip entire groups of workers of even the status of being a worker, and therefore the right to bargain collectively and fight back as equals. Nothing is sacred. Nothing is safe. I mean, I think about this every single day now as a new parent. And it's not possible, really, to mitigate or talk around, or pussyfoot, as my mom would say, the fact that they can win, and their agenda is every bit as terrifying and nightmarish as our darkest imaginations can conjure. And so when I think about hope, how do I get to hope from there? Because I'm like Dick, I'm not naturally optimistic. And in fact, the strategies that Dick has for sort of imbuing hope on a day-to-day level are not my strategies. We've been arguing about this for decades. By the way, I met you when I was in junior high, and it was at a park, one of the downtown parks, probably Alameda, for a May 1st celebration. In, I don't know, 1989, 1990, something like that. And you were one of the speakers, and you were talking about the history, and like, I was, you know, very much the youngest person there. It was like me and maybe one or two other students. Maybe I might have been there with Melinda's son, Shane. But we were there, the only young people there. Everybody else was like, at least to us, just super, super old. And there was a big argument about whether people should register Democrat or Peace and Freedom or Green. The Green Party was new, it was just on the ballot. And you made an impassioned pitch for registering Democrat so people could vote in the primaries because that's important, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was really grumpy. That seems so. How could Dick Flacks, who's radical? I listened to his radio show. He's a radical. How can he be telling people to go into the Democratic Party? Like, good. But your arguments about it stuck in my head and echoed into my own political transformation to a point where I think registering within the other party is silly. Anyway, that's when we first met. It was actually a lot longer ago than that. So I'm not an optimist of the sort who sees the new radicalization of workers in this country, which is phenomenal and exciting to see that the labor movement is being demand-driven right now by workers who want a better life, who will take on the boss. To see my own union get off its ass finally and take on the big three auto companies and win a contract for the ages that's going to help every worker in this country again. Like, those are all great things, but I don't optimism from them because as a student of history, and I'm like, hey, that could get rolled back in an instant. They could divide those workers on race lines or on the lines of specialization. It's really great to see, of course, that people are fighting back on the housing crisis. It's wonderful to see. I'm a lifelong renter. They just raised my rent again, you know. And people are being activated by that and organizing about it and talking about housing as a social right again. And that's wonderful, and we can take optimism from that, but that can be beaten and rolled back. You get a third of those people into a home and they start building equity, and then it's really easy to get them to vote for city council members that will protect their equity versus putting other people in homes. We've seen that happen. Point is, I've studied with Dick and I've learned so many times where we've snatched defeat out of the jaws of victory. And on the other hand, I know what the stakes are and how much we have to win, that it can't be just the good things that are happening on side of the bad things that get me up in the morning and give me hope. So what is it? It's something deeper, and it's really flaxy. You have to bear with me because I'm going to get a little darker before we get to the light. Because I think that we are finally out of the long 90s. I think it's kind of what Lucas was saying. I'm putting a little academic spin on it. That finally, after decades of an attitude in which we thought either we won something so completely we can take them for granted and we don't have to worry about them, or that, hey, maybe the right wing had some points about this and that, and we can take some of their ideas and triangulate this and come together and have this nice center where we all get along and everything's fine, right? So we can deregulate the banks. So we don't need a strong labor movement. So we don't need to have government intervention into the housing market. We don't need any of those things. We can take these ideas from the right because everything's just going to be fine because we're beyond those conflicts. That's what I think of as the 90s. Is a period of, capitulation. But I think that we're through that. I don't want to bring up trauma, but I think that it ended in 2016 in the Democratic primary. I know that's still sore for a lot of us. But I even saw an interview the other day with Secretary Clinton who said, looking back, I see now that it didn't really make sense to not just support full, forgiveness of student loans because there wasn't anybody out there that was interested in voting for some piecemeal small part of that. And the young people wanted something bold, and Democrats need to give that. But she got that. I think everyone in this room gets some version of that. What gives me hope is that at this point in history, I hope, we are actually so disillusioned that we no longer take for granted that the things that we want, or our parents want, or our grandparents want, can't be taken away after an election. My whole life has been in the left. I'm a red diaper baby. My baby's diapers are red. Some of them are red, black, and green as well. But this is a multi-generational project for me. But in the entire time that I've been around and can remember or could read, the left has been in crisis, right? I mean, we've been in the crisis of the left. Okay, if you had a medical condition for 50 years and it just never went away, it was always there, right? You'd stop thinking of it as like an acute sickness you got to go to the emergency room for. You see that this is some kind of chronic problem, maybe genetic. But the point is, all my life we've talked about how the left is in this crisis. We have different names for it. The decline of the New Deal order, the rise of the new right? But it all comes down to this. Working people, particularly white working people, can't always be relied on to vote for progressives and the left. Literally from the 1950s heyday of 50% trade union density and most of them voting Democrat, it's been a decline since then, but we talk about it as a crisis. The crisis means we'll get over the crisis and we'll go back to the way that it was. What if instead, the period of time that we all think about as kind of the good old days, after World War II, when there was a consensus that when you graduate from college, you should have a place to live and a decent job, right? Where we took care of one another through a welfare state. Those kinds of ideas that people slogged through the mud and sacrificed for through the war to build. We somehow convinced ourselves that that was then the norm. What if, when we step back, we look and we count the years, actually the years of that heyday was just a few decades in the middle of the century. And before that, of course you knew that white working people could support fascism and racism and all kinds of reactionary stuff. Of course you knew that the threat of a right wing that really hates democracy and equality was real. We knew that. What if we think and we understand that that period of time was special and it was the result of action by people, sacrifices, bravery, people shooting for revolution but settling for reform, people breaking rules and norms. That's how we got that little nice period, that little break in history. What gives me optimism is finally having a conversation across generations where we can all admit that we've all had these narratives and these stories that have made us take this for granted, and it's too dangerous for any of us to have those. Yes, Gen Z doesn't have it. Like, they grew up completely with not even the Obama extension into the long 90s, hope you change, everything's going to be fine, I'm going to deregulate shit, don't look at my right hand or my left, you know. They didn't even see that. It's just been pure, unbridled, unfettered capitalism, a chaotic world order. They don't know who Yitzhak Rabin was. They never saw the two sides come together and make a plan for peace. They've only seen this carnage. And that's why their perspective on this crisis can be different than older folks with the same values. The point being, I have optimism if we can be like Dick. If we can spend an entire life pacing ourselves in this struggle, knowing that it's not like the revolution comes next week and then it's cool, like we fixed it. But it's also not like, hey, it's okay if we vote for some moderate Republicans or we take on some of their ideas because, you know, it's all balanced and everything's going to be cool. The Republican Party is a party that is being taken over by fascists, and we can't pretend otherwise. The point being, if we're like Dick, if we're patient, but also radical, if we're pragmatic, but also visionary, if we always talk to people younger than us and really listen to them and bring their ideas on board into our own way of thinking, if we don't let us break apart in a generational crisis of misunderstanding one another, if we're more like Dick, then we can build the left and the movement that is for the long haul, that can roll these people back, that can win over a century and stay in power and keep them at bay. Making history means being like Dick Flacks. The hope that we can have is that more of us